So funny. So our first speaker is Theresa Kulat. And I met, and I call you Teri, so I'm gonna go back and forth. But Teri came to an everyday deep probably, I don't know, sometime in the fall. And one of her friends was like, "You gotta talk to Teri, she'd be a great speaker." And when we started talking, we covered a lot of ground. We were talking everything from the interconnectedness of the universe to, right, as our starting point. And actually talking to Teri is what kind of led to this collaboration idea. She's a collaborative attorney, and you'll see in many facets of her life how important the idea of collaboration is. So please help me welcome Theresa Kulat.
Lovely introduction. And oh, see, I put my things on. You got it? Yeah, I'm good. I knew I was going to do that. Yeah. So thanks all for being here. Yeah. So if you knew me before I got married, I was Teri Beran, and then I married a man named Scott Kulat who had a brother named Teri, so there already was a Teri Kulat. So I had to be Theresa Kulat. So depending on where I am and who's talking to me, I flip around a little bit. So thanks, Dale, for that introduction, and for letting me be here today to share some of my story and how in different contexts I collaborate with other people in service to something greater. Aristotle said that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So each part really lives in service to the whole. Individual parts, in surrendering to the whole, can then do more, experience more, and be more. To collaborate is to surrender to something greater. You align yourself with something that's working and others that are aligned with that common goal. The individual then has more capacities and more synergies when they're with people who are like-minded. Collaboration is what life is about, literally. So my personal story, in 1961, my parents got married, and on their honeymoon they had sex. They did. And one little sperm joined with one little egg, and 9 months later, there was little me. A single cell in the program encoded in the DNA evolved and turned into a little person. Parts joining together to create a single new whole. Now, we could actually sit here and just marvel at the wonder that is the human body. I mean, think about it. We have a heart that pumps, we have lungs, we have muscles, we have bones, we have a brain. All of these organs have a function, and when they function together, what is created, the whole, can do so much more than what any of those individual components could do on their own. And then you throw in consciousness, which kind of keeps them all together, and you get a miracle. I'm a miracle, you are a miracle. So little me grew up on the south side of Chicago in a 6-flat with grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles, and we had a big crazy family. And I had 2 younger brothers, so I'm the oldest of 3. After that we moved to Oak Lawn, where I went to school at a public school. So I was a public. And in 8th grade, I had to give a speech. And so I read this gigantic coffee table book about astrology. So I read it cover to cover, and it was like so fascinating. And I got up and I gave my speech. And for me, there really wasn't a problem reconciling this body of knowledge with my Catholic faith. Now, some people said, like, whoa, wait a second, you're not supposed to do that stuff. But my parents were pretty open-minded and fairly liberal. And I'm like, well, it makes sense. Like, there's an intelligence that created this amazing universe. Why wouldn't it make sense that the parts that you see on a chart could be corresponding to the parts that you see out there in the universe? There is a unity in the macrocosm that's holographically reflected in the microcosm. The universe itself models infinite interconnection and cooperation. There's a perfect balance between the gravitational pull of the sun and all the planets that spin around it. And then we have moons. And why wouldn't it make sense that the infinite creative intelligence would make it work together? There's a cooperative oneness in the universe. Now, during high school, I went to Mother Macaulay on the south side, and I really got in touch with the collaborative nature of life, especially in theater. That is where I viscerally got like how things can work when people are working together. So for many weeks, I was in the cast, so we, the performers, were like learning our lines, we were practicing our songs, we were choreographing our dances, and then in a different space, the orchestra, the instruments were like practicing their songs, and in another part of the school was the stage crew, and they were building the sets and the props. So during dress rehearsal week, we all came together, and we threw in the talents of the costume people and the props people, and then lights and sound, all these layers of complexity until finally there's opening night. And then you add an audience. The whole, the uplifting experience of telling the story was all these parts that came together that were also made of smaller parts. 3 years later, at Mother Macaulay, I got to play Maria in The Sound of Music. Somebody here in the audience was there.
I wasn't done. In the same place.
So auditioning for that role and learning the role, I literally would pray to God, the universe, my higher power, to let me be an instrument of the story. I actually did roll through the hills of Dan Ryan Woods, if anybody knows the South Side, singing out there. And finally, my goal was to be the instrument so people would see the story and really get the story in their hearts and be inspired. Now, there's a word, it's called samadhi, and it's the feeling of oneness. And when I was in that show, at the end, the final curtain call, you know how like the people bow and then the final person comes down, so I come down and I bow and then I grasp the hands of the people on each side of me. And in that moment, like, I felt myself expand into the hands of the people next to me, through the whole cast, into the audience, out into the city, out into the universe, and I was like all this beautiful sense of light and wonder, and like we were all one. And then I was back in my body, and I was like, whoa, I was like one little individual. But I really got how I might be one little individual, but I'm part of, in service to all of creation, our little performance was part of a cosmic production. And that's sort of what we've got going on here tonight, too. It's my viewpoint. I continued to grow and experience collaboration in different contexts. I went to John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio. My friends and I started a sorority, so if you've been in a sorority, you know cooperation occurs when women get together and we decide we're going to get something done. I also, after college, worked for Procter & Gamble, so I was on sales teams and worked in nursing homes and hospitals, which hospitals and nursing homes, again, collaboration all over the place. I led retreats at the Warrenville Cenacle, which is a Catholic retreat center, if any of you guys go to retreats, and there I was part of a team. So my spirituality has always been really an important part of my life. In 1992, I had a new collaboration. I married Scott Kulat. And as I said in the beginning, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And marriage is a place where we see that people come together and then they can create, they can do more than either of them could do on their own. And this is in marriage where we're called to surrender to something greater than us. So one of the things we did was we built a custom home. Has anybody here ever built a custom home? A lot of stuff that goes into that, right? We kind of take things for granted. Oh, Cinda, right? First we hired an architect to take our little stick drawings and turn them into plans. And then Ron Sievers was our general contractor. We bought a lot. And then, of course, you've got your carpenter crews, you've got your plumbing crews, you've got your electricians, painters, landscapers, all those people, each of them doing their own thing, but together it makes a house. And then, in that case, our little home had a consciousness about it. Like, it was, all they did was in service to creating a place where we could call home. At that time, I was working as a local government attorney, representing school boards, fire departments, and villages, municipalities. So there's another area of collaboration, right? It literally takes a village to run a village. In that home, we did all sorts of things that we had planned. We had lots of parties with family and friends, and then the ultimate collaboration, we had 2 sons. Kevin was born in 1995, and Ben was born in 2000. So in 2000, I also found out about collaborative law. I had a spiritual director at the time I was working with, and I had a law practice, and I remember sitting there with her, and I said, you know, I'm pulled in too many directions. I go to the office, I can be a great lawyer, but my spirituality is not allowed through the front door. And then I go over to the retreat center, and I do all this wonderful spiritual work, but I'm not using my legal practice. I'm not using my legal expertise. So how can I integrate these things? There's got to be a way that I can collaborate with people who would understand and embody this union of these 2 opposites. The next day, I went into Borders bookstore, and there was a magazine called Spirituality and Health. I picked it off the shelf, I'm looking through it, and I found a little article on the International Alliance of Holistic Lawyers. There really is such a thing. And I was like, oh my God, this is my tribe. Lawyers who are committed to peaceful advocacy, holistic legal principles, where compassion, forgiveness, and healing are seen as part of the role of the legal profession. And it so happened, hello, there is some divine order, that their annual meeting that year was in Chicago. So I signed up, I went to the conference, and at the conference, I met a man named Stu Webb, who had, a few years earlier, created collaborative law in Minnesota. At this point in the story, my husband and I, we had quite a bit of tension in our marriage, and although I was trying to be an instrument of peace, there was not very much peace at home. And it didn't feel right, but you know, I could go into this whole story. My grandparents were divorced when my father was 4 years old, and they never got over it. So he was 30, we'd be at a party, and like Grandpa would be in the basement, and if Grandma came down the stairs, he would literally get up and walk out the back door, so he didn't have to be in the same room with her. And everybody was on pins and needles, and it was horrible. They died in their 80s, never having reconciled. And I didn't want that, Scott didn't want that. My parents were happily married, his were too. We didn't quite understand why we couldn't make it work, but the truth is, we just decided it would be better if we ended our marriage. But we didn't want to do it in a way that was going to be acrimonious and cause a lot of pain to our children. I contacted Stu up in Minnesota, and I said, hey, is there anybody in Illinois that does this? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, I want to do this. So I called an attorney who I knew, who I thought would be aligned with it. She was also a mediator. He did too. And Scott and I used the collaborative process to get divorced in 2001. And here's how ours worked, because this is what Dale really wants me to talk about, right? So neither of us wanted the other person to be harmed. We didn't want to fight. We both knew that if either of us suffered, it was just going to hurt our children. So we were both committed to an outcome, a result that would be beneficial to each of us. We dropped the blame game. I remember a conversation, and Scott's like, okay, yeah, I'm to blame, you're to blame, nobody's to blame. Let's let it go. It's not going to help anybody to make the other person wrong. The second thing we did is we each hired lawyers specifically for the purpose of settling, which means that when you do a collaborative divorce, that you don't fight. You know, you don't ever go to court. We negotiated our terms and put everybody in a problem-solving mode so that whenever we had an issue, it was like, okay, how's this going to work in the long term, not just a short term? Our goal, everybody on the team, he and I and each of our lawyers, the goal we were all committed to was peace in our family, mutual respect, and an outcome that would work for us and our kids. After months of negotiating, Scott bought a new house, we signed our final papers, and we showed up in court one time, and a new chapter of our life began, raising children as not as husband and wife, but as co-parents. So in the fall of 2002, I took the first collaborative law training in Chicago. I thought I was going to be a coach because I was doing astrology and coaching people, and then my coach says to me, you have a law degree, you know that, right? You could be a lawyer. I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess I could. So I learned family law. I had never done family law prior to that, but I really wanted to help people. And that was the moment of surrender. It's like, okay, really? This is what you want me to do? But I could see how Collaborative had helped my family, and I wanted to help others reach agreements and create results that were grounded in peace. So that's when I took mediation training, and I've been doing interest-based negotiations ever since then. I guess the other key thing to know about Collaborative as it's practiced now, back then we were just a team of 4. Now the field itself has evolved, and there are therapists who are trained in the collaborative model, and there are financial people trained in the collaborative model. So if you were to get divorced or work with the collaborative team, it's kind of like at a hospital, right? You have a doctor, but you also have a nurse, and you have an anesthesiologist. So people who have expertise in particular areas help with these particular areas. So parenting, for example, if you have minor children, a child specialist works with the family to help them navigate what's important to their children. If you can imagine at the beginning of a divorce, 2 people sitting down and setting up a family mission statement. I had one couple, they worked with the coach and they had adult children, and they said, but we want our children to feel loved and cared for. We don't want them to be suffering at all because of what we've decided to end our marriage. So everything as we progressed through the negotiations, they would go back to that as the benchmark. Does this support scenario, does this division of the assets, does this money we're setting aside, does it support our family's mission? If you're in court, if you're in litigation mode, really you're trying to please a judge, and one person's trying to prove that they're right and the other's wrong, and the other person's trying to, no, I'm right and you're wrong. So again, in collaborative, it's really focused on how can we get a result that's going to allow everyone to thrive. Another family I worked for, speaking of the Book of Face, we did her divorce in 2007. They had 3 kids that were like 6, 8, and 11, and I see them on Facebook, and every milestone, Mom and Dad are right there. Every dance, every prom, every graduation. I show up at soccer games, Dad's there, Mom's there, Dad's girlfriend's right there, everybody's together. It's like the kids feel loved by everyone, and that's really important. And here's another family. This picture was taken 12 years after our divorce. Scott and I have always been a team, raising our kids, that's the higher goal, and now he has a new wife, and she's part of the team. Collaborating, aligning with a higher vision, has brought couples back together. I actually, as a divorce lawyer, am very proud to say that I've had couples come and they really think they're going to get divorced. So we're doing everything. We're doing the paperwork, we're doing the financial projections, they're working with the coach, and then they realize, oh my goodness, we could actually align. We could get together again. And so they've chosen to not get divorced because they reconnected to a future that both of them could move into. So finally, the most important collaboration, I believe, is the collaboration within oneself. I pray, I meditate, I do yoga. Astrology is my language and my context for seeing and integrating different aspects of myself. We all have different parts of ourselves with different goals and different motivations. In my case, spirituality and the law seem to be separate and far apart from one another. But now both are present, and I can see them both at work in my work and in the other things I do. I even started another business called Trinity Collaboration, which is a place where people share and have resources on personal and spiritual growth and build community. All of this is an expression of my surrender and living in service to something greater. My final story is that in 1998, I met Laura J. Murphy. And we looked at each other like, oh my God, you're on my team, right? So we know we're on the same team. And several years later, she had a solstice ceremony at the yoga center, and people were speaking their intentions. And I said, my intention is that DuPage County become the Sedona of the Midwest. That we have healers, and that we have great energy. And it seems to me like Dale and Cindy have answered that call. And I'm so grateful that you all are here, because we're together building this wonderful energy and this healing to make the world a better place. And for me, that is a worthy goal to surrender to.